All right. And welcome back, guys, to the Self-Selecting Podcast. I'm your host, Corey Hageman. And today we are joined by none other than Lacy Dunn. Hi. Hi. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing lovely, thank you. You guys, I can't explain how excited I am to be on this podcast today because Corey and I used to live in Texas and would see each other, and just seeing her evolution is just incredible. So I'm honored to be here and really excited to be reconnected with you.
We were just talking about it. I mean, it's been what, like 5, almost 6 years. And I mean, like, it's really amazing, like what you've been able to do to kind of see as a bystander, like the impact you've made on the industry, specifically in the last like couple of years, everything around like hormonal health, gut health, thyroid health. Yeah, so I'm pumped. I think I think listeners are going to be so excited to get to know you. So I mean, like, to kick it off, would you just give just a background? Who are you?
Well, that means the world to me. Thank you. And so I'm going to give you guys a quick rundown because honestly, when I listen to podcasts, I skip over what the guests, their background. I'm like, I don't care. So quick rundown is I come from the bodybuilding world, got started in that back at UCF when I was weight training in order to make the UCF cheerleading team. So I started in bodybuilding, did the, bodybuilding.com spokesmodel contest, absolutely was into, nutrition and dietetics for that, got my schooling at UGA. Then I was still bodybuilding, went to the Texas Women's University in Houston. That's where essentially that I met Corey back at that time. And I was still kind of training, going hard. At that time, I was, going through this trying to train, trying to do online training, getting my master's degree, also being, like a graduate assistant, just doing a lot of stuff. And ultimately, I actually started developing my own issues, random weight gain, puffiness, eyebrow hair loss, acne, gut issues, you name it. And I unfortunately caused and created my own hypothyroidism for just chronic stress, and doctors wouldn't diagnose me. So that's essentially how I got into functional medicine. I was able to find out about my own thyroid issues and actually treat the root cause, stress, versus just like throwing the medication at me, even though I am on it now. But that's how I essentially got into functional medicine. And then through my ongoing experiences with learning about functional medicine, I became completely obsessed with all the intertwining things from the gut, thyroid, liver, detoxification. And then through that, I was also able to learn about the testing, like the GMAP, the Dutch test, mold testing, you name it. So I became completely obsessed, loved it, was living my best life over in Houston. And then, of course, we had the Hurricane Harvey. And I didn't really notice that I was sadly losing a lot of weight at that time, a lot of muscle. Sometimes when you're just go, you kind of don't recognize those things happening. And ultimately, unfortunately, I had to deal with a cavitation in my jaw that had to have significant surgery. I lost like 15 to 20 pounds. I was completely wasting away. And that was all from a combination of the jaw cavitation, mold toxicity, a candida issue, SIBO, H. pylori parasites. So I dealt with like literally everything that I work with clients with, and that sucked. But going through that essentially is what has evolved me into the dietitian I am today, with knowing the intertwining connections between how these different things impact the body. And so now I'm completely obsessed with helping people go from just simply surviving to thriving. And I wouldn't take away any of those experiences. But that's where I am today, all about functional medicine, diving into the nitty gritties and what causes people some chronic health issues.
That's amazing. And I mean, I didn't know that you yourself had gone through just the slew of diagnoses. But I mean, like, in my experience, I mean, like, someone speaking from a place of actually, firsthand experiencing those symptoms, because in a lot of cases, I mean, and please correct me at any point, but those symptoms, I mean, they're persistent and they're chronic. And a lot of people, they're in a position where, when they go to a provider, go to a health coach, I think a lot of times they're just told like, oh, well, you just need to add this medication and this should clear it up. But then they're kind of strung out on these 6, 12, 18, 24-month journeys where they're just put on medication to medication without really addressing the root cause, which, listeners know, like, that ultimately, that's my goal with the information I put out, is looking at the underlying cause. And I know that's very important to you as well for whatever diagnosis that you're talking about. So I want to dive into the hormonal health side because I think that, even though it's something that I talk about a lot, I think you have a similar but different very different vantage point, what would you say hormonal health looks like? Like what does having healthy hormones, what does that present as?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. And my brain always goes to how can I dive that question into 5 billion things? So, hormonal health, just want to start. You can have perfect hormones, but feel like trash. You can feel great and have trash hormones. So it doesn't go in hand, but for the most part, if you have a healthy hormones in your body, you're going to have energy and vitality and a libido, and you're going to have a good mental clarity and your weight, your body composition. You're going to feel good in your own skin for the most part. So I like to say overall, to generalize, having healthy hormones is having the energy and the ability to do the things that you love while feeling confident in your body.
I love it. I love that so much. And I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, so when is it important? What are the presenting symptoms or potential signs that someone should seek professional help relative to maybe a hormonal imbalance?
Yeah, there's so many different signs and symptoms, whether we're talking about low testosterone, high estrogen, completely flatlined, no estrogen, no progesterone. But for the most part, there's going to be some shape or form of issue when it comes down to mood. So whether that's, PMS, mood swings, depression, anxiety, those are big things. There's going to be typically some shape or form of issue when it comes down to either water retention or weight gain. Then there's going to be something like maybe skin manifestations, acne, especially cystic. There might be hair loss on your hair, eyebrow hair loss. There's typically some shape or form of weight loss resistance. Like I said, there can also be issues when it comes down to hair growing on your face itself, growing on your mustache, falling out exactly in the temples. And a lot of people too, there starts to be kind of like this neurological brain fog, low cognition thing. Plus, some people have a low heart rate or dizziness upon standing. They have an inability to weight train. So you might have kind of like a weird issue when it comes down to having like the whole low heart rate, chronic fatigue issue with that. And most people, they just kind of like they feel off, whether that's, okay, I don't have the desire to have sex, or maybe I just don't have the desire to want to hang out with my friends on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot of different signs and symptoms. And I like to say, if there's something that's taking away from your quality of life and it doesn't feel like you do not feel like you, there could be something off. Now, that being said, hormones are responding to either the internal or external environment. So I do love looking at hormones, but I do want to pinpoint and make the fact, please do not, dear Lord, just jump into a Dutch test, because the hormones are trying to give you this signal. They're the fire alarm saying something's off. Please work on it, whether that's a nutrient deficiency, gut infection, toxic bucket overload, or there's some shape or form of like chronic trauma. So there's a lot of things that go into symptoms of the hormones, but I do want to make sure that your listeners know those symptoms are your body asking for help. So hormones are off. Figure out why are they off, not just, throwing something at it to fix those hormone issues. So if you have low testosterone, don't just go on testosterone. Why is your testosterone low?
I couldn't agree more. And I love that. I love that analogy of the fire alarm that, that is your only body's way of signaling that it needs more attention in some regard. And just because you have a low level, which I mean, we can probably talk until we're blue in the face on reference ranges and how that varies lab to lab or provider to provider. But just the fact that a level is technically out of range doesn't indicate just starting a medication. And I'm personally a big fan of actually looking at what that person's baseline is, because I think in a lot of cases, someone's baseline is dysregulated. So sifting through, okay, what is dysregulation from what this person's used to, and is what they're used to, is that what they should be used to, or is it something that they just over time they've become adaptive to, and kind of give in credence to, hey, this is what's normal for me, whether that be extreme PMDD, just very sensitive to different foods, changes in hormonal fluctuations related to their cycle, or a lack of a cycle in itself. So I want to steer this more into the gut health realm, because that's something that, I'm very clear with clients, like, hey, if there is any kind of issue that is specifically tied to gut health, it's out of my scope. It's not something I want to get my hands into. Within bodybuilding, I mean, like both of our backgrounds, we see that you have these extensive periods of low energy availability. Now more than ever, you have the promotion, or I guess inclusion, of performance enhancing drugs, which ultimately are going to work on that cascade on whether it's the HPO, HPA. So I guess we're going through that client journey, client journey of, okay, I'm presenting with symptoms. We've got the hormonal panel because we've agreed, okay, this is a deviation from whatever their baseline is. So what is the point really where you would say, okay, this is indicative of potentially a gut specific problem?
Yeah, that's a big question. So, ultimately, we are not what we eat. We are what we digest, absorb, and assimilate. And if your gut is not healthy and happy, then you are not going to be able to optimally digest and then absorb your nutrients, which is then going to manifest in giving the energy that you need, but also filtering down into how your body creates and metabolizes different hormones, whether that's thyroid or sex hormones. And the key thing too is there's anything going on in your gut that's causing inflammation, whether that's, SIBO or yeast or parasites, or if you're having something like leaky gut, that's causing systemic inflammation in your body, which is going to cause downregulation in not only things like how your body converts your thyroid hormone, but downregulation in your sex hormones, sometimes even high amounts of sex hormones. But that inflammation is another fire alarm, and that causes detrimental side effects to different parts of your body. And physique-wise too, I wish I could get a hold of these bodybuilders and just fix their guts, because if you have gut issues, inflammation in your gut, that's going to be detrimental to your physique, whether that's causing high cortisol, causing you to actually be catabolic, or just causing systemic inflammation in which that you're going to start kind of like pushing fat to those visceral organs or having weird issues when it comes to body fat storage. So with gut issues in particular, sometimes there are specific digestive related symptoms: gas, bloating, heartburn, constipation, diarrhea, loose stools. Sometimes there is an issue when it comes down to, okay, my physique, I'm watery, I'm puffy, I'm not losing weight, or I'm actually, losing too much weight at a period of time. But then there can also be a issue when it comes down, and there's so many symptoms, but like anxiety, depression, mental clarity issues, skin issues. So there's a lot of different things that can, all be incorporated into why is my gut not healthy. But hands down, like 70 to 80% of our immune system is in our gut. So the first thing that we should ever do if we want to be a physique competitor, or if we want to optimize our body composition, is to make sure our gut is healthy and happy. And that's a big thing. And I see a lot of different bodybuilders and people who want to optimize their body composition, I see them skip over that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, like, when you look at that period, I think there is the understanding that, okay, it's going to be extreme and it is not going to be a healthy phase, as opposed to what we would do in a state where we're not in that state of low energy availability for an extended period of time. Like just simply getting down to those body fat levels. I hope, and I try to push this out for clients and for listeners, that when you're getting on stage, like the goal is not health, like the priority isn't health, but it's not an excuse to put yourself in a position where you are hammering down all of these different systems to a point that now post-show you were having to spend double the amount of time, triple the amount of time finding regulation, which, I mean, really that post-show phase, I just recorded an episode on this, is like, okay, post-show, what's the time frame there, as opposed to like your building phase. But for me, what I believe is that, like, okay, we have this phase where we're trying to undo those dysregulations that are truly intended to be acute. But yeah, we see a lot of people, they come out of post show and it's not a 6-8 week period. It's 12 weeks. It's 24 weeks. And before you know it, okay, it's been a year of hypothalamic amenorrhea, just this new onset of sensitivities, whether that be to a change in training output, whether that be to the inclusion of foods that, maybe are a little bit more inflammatory. So I think being able to assess like what happens after the show, to look for those clues and signs of, okay, what needs to be re-regulated, I think that can be helpful. I guess my question for you, like, are you seeing that shift for your current or prior physique competitors, where they're coming to you? Are you seeing an uptick in PED use that now is putting them in the positions they're in? Or maybe not exclusively, maybe it's not direct PED use that's having that impact, but are you seeing that on your intake forms, on your consultations? Because you do the consultations as well. And I mean, that's something that, like, I mean, I didn't realize in the last couple of years. I'm like, wow, this isn't just an isolated incident. This is majority of people within our realm.
Yeah, that's a Great question. I love working with bodybuilders. I work with people don't even know I work with pro bodybuilders, and the PED usage, it's a great question. What I'm finding is that it depends on the PED that they're using. And I think it's multifactorial. So I don't think it's just the PED that's themselves. Sometimes, I mean, obviously if a PED could be causing, liver issues, and that's going to manifest in some gut issues and you name it. But I really, honestly, I don't think it's as much the PEDs as it is not feeding the gut microbiome correctly and overtraining and just completely exhausting the body. I really do feel that most people, when it comes down to being in the bodybuilding world, it's not having enough variety and incorporating a lot of different types of foods and fibers and prebiotics and polyphenols. And I think it's overtraining and not slowing down, just constantly go, go, go. And I get it. We're athletes, right? We always want to be doing things, but I think and of course it's hit or miss depending on the PED, but I based on what I see, I'm able to see these bodybuilders stay on some of their PEDs while healing their gut, working on things, slowing down, and they feel so much better. So I don't know if it's the PEDs or if it's everything else in the quote unquote stress inflammatory bucket in the body.
I love that. And frankly, I think there's a lot of carryover with individuals assuming that PEDs in themselves are causing some of these issues, gut related or non-gut related. Whereas when you consider, okay, what is the state that a natural athlete, and I don't necessarily mean using PEDs to take everyone in the realm to super physiological levels, but at least having some supportive therapy in place if you're going to be in these states for an extended period of time. If you're going to be doing back-to-back seasons, at least ensuring, okay, is there something that could, if it's going to be what you're going to do with or without enhancements, having the enhancements in place depending on what they are, depending on the duration, the right dose. I'm finding that a lot of individuals are actually having better outcomes, having at least a baseline in place so that that's not another issue that they're having to address prior to finishing their competition.
Yeah, it's so funny because way before I knew about PEDs and I got into the research on them, I was so anti-PEDs, and I was like, all these people, they're screwing up their bodies because they're doing PEDs. But in reality, I honestly see, and I'm not saying take your PEDs, but I'm seeing the women that are taking low levels of test or maybe a low dose amount of Anavar. Actually, these women are the ones that after contest prep, they do better. They come off the PEDs and their bodies are so much better. The ones that take, and I don't like saying, oh my God, take T3 or T4 in your preps, but the ones that are doing some of these things, honestly, sometimes their preps and their hormones, they look better. And that's why I love when people come to me and they do their pre and their post, and then they do their post after they come off their therapies. And I'm like, you look better than the natural competitors.
And that's the wild thing is I think I was in the same boat as well. You were competing already, I believe. When I got into the sport, so I started in 2015. Yep. Yeah. So you were for listeners. Lacey was one of the first fitness accounts that I followed. I've been around for a minute. With that though, I had a very similar stance is okay, no, exclusively PEDs are going to do damage. There's not a way that they can be used to actually facilitate more stable outcome during that prep. But what I found is a lot of these consultations, a lot of individuals, they're like, listen, I'm going to do it regardless. So what can I have in place that's going to help me pivot and at least come out of this without problems that I would say are avoidable. And same on the T4, T3. That's something that I think oftentimes is demonized, yet we do see in Gen Pop. From a provider standpoint, it is prescribed left and right, whether there's a strong indication or not. And it's not to say, okay, that in itself is a justification, but I do think the data on T4, T3 at a supportive level, I think it's pretty advantageous, particularly if the athlete is going to be in that contest prep for an extended period of time. I'd rather have someone have that in place, manage fatigue from the get-go, know that, okay, fatigue is going to increase, but we have this in place. We shouldn't expect that stall around that 3-4 week mark that ultimately is inevitable. Even with someone who's highly resilient, we're typically going to see that down regulation within the first month. So big fan of having non-androgenic PEDs in place if it makes sense for the athlete. And I hope listeners are keying up to that neither of us are advocating, hey, just put it in place
Yeah,
blindly.
no.
But I do think there's a strong indication for a lot of individuals who have already made that decision. They've already accepted the risks that come with PEDs, both non-androgens and androgens. On the TRT side, actually, you know what? I want to take a step back on, because you had brought up liver health. How do you have any kind of experience, any kind of history with athletes who've come to you with prior SARM use?
Yes. And I would definitely say those are the ones that hormones look the worst. And I'm like, Lord, if anybody says SARMs, please just don't. Just don't. Because they go, not only is their thyroid tanked, their hormones tanked, their liver values are skyrocketed through the roof, but I see a lot of autoimmune issues with them. And that's not fun to deal with.
No. And I mean, like, I feel like it's like every 7th or 9th video is about SARMs, and it's the same message. It's like, hey, like, if you're using this because you think it's female friendly, you've been misinformed. Even at low doses, we still see that it's highly hepatotoxic. And I mean, at the time when I started educating myself around PEDs, I mean, the research on SARMs is extremely limited. But even within that, I mean, it's still not promising from an accuracy standpoint. But what we see is that liver enzymes, they're much, much higher, even at low, mild doses from SARMs, as opposed to something like Anavar, any kind of oral anabolic, which to me, I don't think that we can really go through a risk analysis without considering the systemic impact of a PED.
Yeah. The key thing that I want a lot of people to keep in consideration is if you're going to take something and you're going to ingest it into your body, you need to know exactly what it might do. And you need to outweigh the pros and cons in regards to not only prep, but also your overall life and your life cycle. I would say a lot of people, they kind of like, they want to jump into what's going to help me maximize myself. And you really have to focus on how can I get through my potential as a natural athlete first, support everything else in regards to training and diet and stress management and sleep and water and everything. And then you can dive into those, but understanding the profiles is key.
Absolutely. And on that note, when we're talking about fatigue management, what have you found to be effective strategies? Because this is one that I feel like for me as an athlete, it was a massive game changer to begin to look at fatigue and be like, yo, I've got to prioritize this as heavily as I do dietary adherence, training volume. Like, have there been any interventions, any strategies for that client? Let's just say that avatar of the client who's like, I work out 6-7 days a week. I'm just one of those people. I mean, that's a big excuse I get, or I guess rationalization. Hey, I just live this lifestyle. I mean, you've been a professional athlete like for a long time. I mean, like, we're talking almost a decade, right? Give or take.
Non-professional, but yes, thank you.
You've competed at a level that I think a lot of people they do strive to attain, and it's one of the things with fatigue, I guess, like how do you navigate that for clients in assisting them to see the value, to establish that buy-in to managing their fatigue, for better health outcomes, for better hormonal outcomes?
Yeah. First thing depends on, what level are they competing, right? So if they're just kind of like, you're not even close to national stage, not even close to pro stage, we want to make sure that like we don't even get to that level of fatigue. And then it's the question for the other people, like what level of fatigue is okay. So the first thing that you have to do, I mean, you can't be overtraining. Even if you're a professional going into bodybuilding, you cannot overtrain. If you're overtraining, your cortisol is going to be through the roof. You're going to be catabolic. You're going to lose muscle and you're going to become insulin resistant. And then you're not going to be able to lose weight, or you're storing body fat in areas you normally shouldn't. So first thing is making sure that you're training. You're not overdoing exercise and using cardio strategically. The key thing is with fatigue, as best you can, focusing on steps over other sources of cardio is really key. And then I see the top 2 things that are super beneficial to help with fatigue management. Well, top 3, 1, water. 2, electrolytes. 3, food, and how you are consuming your food. So I'm a big fan with anybody, like making sure your water is spread throughout the entire day. You're getting in your electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium, trace minerals, plays a big role with your energy levels. And then when it comes down to food, using it strategically, not only for recovery, but also how you feel best when it comes down to energy. So if anybody is in contest prep, making sure that you're pushing your food, especially your carbs, pre and post workout. And then I finding how you spread out your meals. It's going to be person by person dependent, but using that as a way to say, okay, what makes me feel good throughout the entire day is key. For example, some people find that if they're focusing on getting their fats and their proteins with their breakfast and then using carbs throughout the rest of the day, they feel so much better. Other people feel like, and on an energy standpoint, if they do not start their day with a good amount of carbs, they just feel like crap the entire rest of the day. So I find water, electrolytes, how you eat your food and consume it and spread it throughout the entire day is step one. And then of course, the training is key. And then with fatigue management as well, you have to make sure that you're prioritizing, of course, sleep. But two, I find that a lot of people, unfortunately, they make the bodybuilding and the training their life. And that's actually fatiguing for your emotional and mental health and spiritual health. So if a lot of people think, you know what, my bodybuilding's first, I need to go do my training, and they skip out and hanging out with their friends or their boyfriend or going to church, whatever it is. If you do those things, you are going to mentally, emotionally, and spiritually exhaust yourself. And that feels like physical fatigue too. So you have to live your life while still prepping, or you're going to have that fatigue.
I love it. I love it. And I think there's a very strong correlation between individuals who have those reports of burnout towards the tail end of their contest prep. But I mean, like, you even see it like deep into their off season. Food's higher, body fat's higher, yet they still feel like they are under an immense amount of stress. And I think being able to manage that and be very honest. Okay, how much of this is perceived stress? It's not to say that it isn't real, but if it is self-created, I do think that in itself, I mean, it's a gift. That means that you have control over modulating it and being able to lower that stress level. But those clients, I mean, the ones that I have who are finding their off seasons just as stressful as their prep, really try to take them down this path of like, hey, stress will be higher no matter where your starting point, no matter what your baseline of stress is during your off season or your non-diet phase. It will increase from here, as it should, just because you are going to be spread thin. Physiologically, there are going to be adaptations. And although we expect them, it doesn't mean that they won't be hard. Even though we know around this point, around this body fat, it's going to be very difficult. And you might require more recovery or more methods of recovery to get back to that baseline state. If you're stressed in your off season, if you're stressed in that non-dietary phase at a body fat that, you're in a place to support those reproductive functions, it's only going to become harder from here. So that has to be our priority in that phase. Now, you'd mentioned, okay, with the variety and with certain foods, and noting where you begin to feel just crappy, like you begin to feel those acute changes, whether that be gas, changes in, I guess, elimination, energy levels. Would you say, so when you're looking at this differential diagnosis for this individual who maybe they're moving further away from their baseline, they're beginning to, Lacey, hey, I'm having these symptoms, I don't feel normal. What part, okay, so I guess this is good for me to understand too, but what point do you begin to say, okay, we need to take a closer look and maybe run a GI map? What part in the journey is that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Before I forget, so thinking on fatigue, if you are going through fatigue and it's ongoing and you've looked at all those other modalities, please, Lord, get your entire nutrient panel done. That's 100% key. Just want to throw that out there. If you're doing a physique competition, 100%, almost every single competitor that comes to me is missing some shape or form of nutrient and they're fatigued. So definitely just want to throw that out there. Get your entire nutrient panel done. If you have questions on what that would be, message me, DM me, more than happy to give that to you. But the key thing when it comes down to, hey, what's going on with my gut? Please, dear Lord, do not spend your money on a GA map unless you focus on sleep, hydration, stress management, and making sure that you're eating variety in your diet. Okay, a lot of people that are doing contest prep, some don't do if it fits your macros, some just focus on like a strict meal plan, right? So key thing is if you are having ongoing gas, constipation, bloating, weight gain, if you're having a lot of diarrhea, like those are key clinical signs that something is up. Obviously, if there's some other shape or form of symptom, whether that be anxiety, depression, brain fog, acne, hair loss, all those other things. But for the most part, if you're just having a little bit of bloating and a little bit of gas with your foods, there could be just something that your body is not digesting well, or it's something that you are not chewing properly, or potentially an intolerance. For example, if you're consuming a whole entire cup of yogurt, that might just be something that your body is not okay with digesting. That sometimes can be normal. And then if you're having bloating after eating a full cup of broccoli or eating a large salad, that's completely normal. So you have to figure out, what is quote unquote normal? What foods are you consuming? How are you consuming those foods? And you have to question, is this something that is normal for me too? Or is this different? And it's never normal to wake up bloated. It's never normal to have reflux and heartburn, but a little bit of bloating after high volume foods, that's normal. And I bring that up because a lot of people coming out of contest prep are like, okay, my carbs are low. Let me throw in the cauliflower rice. Let me do the high protein, yada, yada, yada. So some things are normal because of those types of foods that you're consuming. And some things are completely not normal outside of, those prep things that people do. And I love the GI map. Freaking love it. It's looking at your digestive capacity, so your ability to break down your nutrients, the health of your intestinal lining, secretory IgA, your immune system. It's looking at markers of dysbiosis, whether that be bacterial, yeast, pathogens. But then it's not going to look at SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It has limitations when it comes down to looking at yeast and parasites. So key thing to question, if you question, is there a gut issue? Hire a professional. Let a dietitian go through the foods that you're consuming, how you're consuming it, your stress management, your life. Let them tell you if you should do a GI map first, because I don't like people spending money if they don't need to. And I want people to try and focus on what are the things that are in your control first.
I love that. And that is exactly why I wanted to have you on, because I think we're so much in alignment around addressing the modifiable lifestyle factors that, frankly, from an adherence standpoint, from the client standpoint, if there's not continuity, if we don't have a baseline, there is a lot of guessing that's occurring. And there's a lot of conclusions that are oftentimes jumped to. And then when you look at the cost of these diagnostic tests, it's like, okay, well, a physique coach just telling you, okay, you're waking up a little bloated, and their first line of treatment is, well, let's go to Life Extension or LabCorp Quest and get a GI map that, what, on the low end, we're talking like $600, like maybe there
should be 300. Just so people are aware, so your listeners know, if they charge you 600, they're ripping you off.
There was a client I had a while back who, he added up the total. He's like, I've spent thousands of dollars in gut related types of tests. And I'm like, okay, I feel like at this point you should be seeking professional help, not, and it's not to disparage someone who does online coaching or, might not have the formal education, but in your experience, this is your realm. What are those minimum criteria that you would look for, that you would say, okay, comfortably, like if you need professional help, this is what I would look for. This is what I would avoid. Are there certain tactics, behaviors, and I don't want to generalize, but even in the realm of physique coaching for prep, there are certain things I'm like, if your coach does this, it's not to say they're a bad coach, but I would definitely key up to that. I would definitely consider, okay, are there any other potential red flags with this professional? What would you say with gut health, functional health within that realm, or some things that listeners can pay attention to or look out for?
Are you talking about looking out for on like how they feel to do testing, or more so look out for with red flags for a coach?
Red flags for a coach. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So red flags for a coach is anybody that is just going to blindly jump into testing without asking about your history, your symptoms, and what you've tried first. Now, don't get me wrong. Some people are just nerds and just want to pull labs. And if that's what you're doing, that's okay. You might be healthy Sally, and all you want to do is look at labs. That's okay. But if somebody is jumping into having you do XYZ tests without actually speaking to you first and diving into your history and your symptoms and what you're dealing with and what you've tried, that's a big red flag. And if they are kind of like upcharging prices, that's a huge red flag as well. There are a lot of different websites that have like the flatline prices. So I use Rupa Health, so I don't make a dime on what these clients are getting those test kits from me. So that's another red flag. If you see that they're upcharging, typically that's going to be, okay, they want you to buy it because they're making money on that test that you buy. And then another thing is like making sure that you and the coach have a good relationship to the point where they know exactly what your goals are. And if they are not aligned in regards to your goals and are throwing the testing, like suggesting that testing, that's another red flag. And their certifications. What's their history? Are they just an online coach? Do they have a degree? Do they have a certification? Is their certification coming from, this random other guy that also doesn't have a degree? That's a big red flag.
I like that. I like that a lot. I think there are a lot of individuals who come to me who they rely very heavily on the diagnostics without assessing the behavior first. And that in itself has kind of become the norm of, well, this coach, they encouraged me to pull labs. Okay, what labs? What are the specifics? Because a CBC is much different than specific hormones that we're taking at certain times of the month. When we're looking at something like amenorrhea, like there are times that those values, we want them to be low. And if they're not low, that would actually be a point of contention. That would be a concern, as opposed to later on in someone's cycle. If those values are still low, okay, we have a different problem or suspicion of a problem. Now, when we're talking about those corrective measures that, let's say, are over the counter, but are specific to one's diet. Okay. I mean, like probiotics, that's an area that oftentimes I see generally exploited. I see as something that, okay, we'll just throw a probiotic in, that'll fix whatever the intolerance is or whatever the gut issue is. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on just blindly, okay, let's put the probiotic in?
Yeah, so probiotics are supposed to be used for a specific purpose. And a lot of different probiotics do certain things, whether that's Lactobacillus rhamnosus or rudatiori, helping to prevent yeast infections, whether that's a spore-based probiotic that might help with the immune system or helping to bind different toxins in the gut, Saccharomyces boulardii, helpful for food poisoning, preventing C. diff, helping with antibiotic therapy, preventing diarrhea. So probiotics should be used based on what your goal is. And there are certain uses of probiotics for like contest prep. For example, Saccharomyces boulardii, it might help prevent intestinal permeability and leaky gut, which is basically what every single athlete deals with. But probiotics should be used based on their purpose. And some probiotics are like fire fluid on a fire if you have an overgrowth or histamine issue. So I truly believe that most people should not need a probiotic. They should be focusing on feeding their microbiome with polyphenols and prebiotic rich foods and fiber. That way the organisms in their gut are healthy, happy, and thriving, and they don't have to go in there with that short-term fertilizer, because that's what it is. Probiotics just short-term fertilizer that may or may even not colonize your gut. Sometimes it's wasting your money. They degrade in the stomach, they don't colonize. So the key thing is making sure that what is the goal, and then making sure that you've taken control over your diet to have a healthy, thriving microbiome. So using them strategically is key. And there's a lot of different, like you can go on Google, there's a lot of different, US probiotic guide, the Canada probiotic guide, and look at those different things, but always use them strategically.
Strategically with intention. I love that. Are there, I would say just generally as a rule of thumb, if you're getting probiotics that don't require refrigeration, is that a red flag? Is that something that people need to be privy to? Like, are there probiotics that, I guess, is resilient the right word? I mean, like they can sustain just normal room temperature? Or is that something like strictly, hey, if you're including that probiotic, okay. Is there any
definitely.
kind of brand?
They don't have to be shelf stable. There's a lot of different good brands, but key thing is getting a third-party tested high-end brand, whether that's like Garden of Life or Pure Encapsulations or Designs for Health. The key thing too is even sometimes dead bacteria, we have postbiotics too. So even if it's not actually going to colonize and be live going into the small and large intestine, sometimes there actually still is a benefit to that organism, whether it's alive or dead. So I definitely would focus on, if you're choosing a probiotic, make sure it's a high quality brand. But yeah, there's a huge conversation over live versus dead and what actually colonizes and what actually helps. It's definitely in the weeds.
Okay. That's so interesting. The postbiotic.
I know, it's so cool. It's so cool.
Yeah. So Okay, similar line of logic with digestive enzymes. Is that
Mhm.
something, I mean, like, I'm sure you get a lot of people who come to you who are just like, hey, I've got papaya enzyme in place, and I don't know specifically. Is that one that you're like, okay, sweet, good baseline? Or is it like, who told you to take this? Why are you taking this? At what dose? What's been your experience with clients who come to you who just maybe already have them in place? Or is that something that generally you say is a good idea to have in place as a baseline?
Yeah, I don't think digestive enzymes are ever going to hurt anybody unless it has like betaine hydrochloric acid. Sometimes that can cause ulceration, especially if you have H. pylori, so that's an issue. The papaya makes me crack up because it really doesn't break down anything much, but digestive enzymes are never going to hurt you. And I always think, like, honestly, if you can have anything, minus of course your teeth, to help digest and break down your foods to potentially absorb more nutrients, why wouldn't you do it? So if you want to do digestive enzymes, like, I'm all for it. And if you're a bodybuilder and you're eating a lot of food, that's 100% going to help you, because honestly, for example, like a girl in her off season might be eating like 85 grams of fat, 300 carb, 140 to 150 protein. Her body doesn't make enough enzymes to actually break that down. So you're going to have to, and you're going to want to add in some support to break that down. Otherwise, she's going to be gassy and bloated.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. That's so helpful. I know a lot of listeners, there's a couple clients in particular who they've come from past situations where the food kept going up, up, up. And it was like, hey, I can't keep eating this because I'm miserable. Like, this is intolerable from a gas and bloating standpoint.
And I
So
have help for
with
that too.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, I have help, not to
No,
interrupt
go.
you.
Oh, please. No, go off with that. What are the types of digestive enzymes that you would say are worth the dollar? And then, with the gas bloating, I mean, like, yeah, roll that right into it.
Yeah, and it's hard because you're eating a lot of food in the off season. Sometimes it's even the quote unquote on season, the contest prep season. But digestive enzymes overall, of course, you want to look at a good amount of protease, amylase, lipase. So the protease is going to digest the proteins, the amylase, the carbs, and the lipase, the fats. Overall, just have a good amount. Unless you need at least about 60,000 IU for the digestive enzymes. I love pure encapsulations, ultra digestive enzymes. There's a lot of different enzymes, but overall, that's good. The key thing for the early feelings of fullness or feeling like things are not moving is you want natural prokinetics. So the prokinetic is going to kind of help push things along. It's not a laxative, but it's going to help push things along. And some of them, like digestive bitters, can act as a prokinetic while at the same time helping your body to naturally release more stomach acid, digestive enzymes, and bile as well to help digest those fats. So help digest those foods. So I like to recommend ginger as just a natural prokinetic. You could take ginger capsules, or you could do something like ginger tea. And then there's things like L-carnitine and 5-HTP at lower doses that can actually act as natural prokinetics as well. But yeah, definitely off season, I recommend kind of like doing a natural prokinetic and then digestive enzymes. There's other things that you could do to help with gas and bloating, but typically, like, you want to focus on, like, instead of asking, do I need to add in fennel? Do I want to try activated charcoal? Instead of asking those things, first question, how are you eating? What are you eating? How are you supporting your motility and stress management first?
Amazing. Amazing. I love that. Now, when we're talking about general, I would say healthy peristalsis, whether that individual is having, let's say, slower, slower digestion. So maybe they're finding they're a little bit more constipated. Do you recommend adding in outside of vegetables? Let's say that their diet is already on the upper end of having those fibrous sources of vegetables. Would you look at something maybe like a psyllium husk? I mean, like, I personally use psyllium husk capsules, but is that one that we're given the green light, or is there reason to maybe take a pause and consider using something else or not using it at all?
That's a great question. So if their diet is on point, water's on point, sleep is on point, stress is on point, first thing I'm going to question is, do you have a poop routine? Obviously, because you don't have that, that's going to be an issue. And then I like to question, okay, what are those sources of the fiber in your diet right now? Do we want to try a different source to see if your body responds better to that? Like kiwis and chia seeds versus oats and spinach, something like that. So trying different types of foods, switching up your diet first is key. But when it comes down to things to help you go to the bathroom, there's a lot of different things you could do. There's fibers, whether that's psyllium husk, acacia fiber, partially hydrolyzed guar gum. There's osmotic laxatives, things that help draw water water into your intestines, like magnesium citrate, or propylene glycol, Miralax. And then there's things that are stimulatory laxatives, whether that's aloe, rhubarb, cascara. So the key thing first, I like to say, is use food first, fibers first. If those things do not work, and I'm a big fan of starting with sun fiber, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, so it's broken down, so it's not going to cause you gas and bloating. Psyllium husk draws water into the intestines to help produce a movement, to make it a little bit more easier to pass. But I like to focus on fiber first, diet fibers first. If that doesn't work, then we can try either a low dose magnesium citrate or oxide. Those are basically going to push water into the intestine to help produce a bowel movement, but that can cause bloating and cramping or loose stools. And I actually am a fan of some use of stimulatory laxatives short term if you're constipated and as needed. So I would stay away from like the smooth move tea. I see a lot of people have issues and actually develop kind of like resistance against that, but you could do like, you could drink some aloe, or you could try something like a low dose amount of cascara, or Siberian, like, or rhubarb, not Siberian, sorry, that's to help for estrogen, but rhubarb can be helpful. So fiber first, then you can try the different supplementations, but you've got to make sure food, water, hydration, stress, poop environment is all taken care of. And if you're really struggling, like constipation wise, that could be a big sign that there's an issue in your gut, whether that's an overgrowth or even maybe like post-viral issue. You might have had some little nerve damage and your vagus nerve might need some love. So you might need to do some vagus nerve stimulation work.
I love that. I want to touch back on Miralax. You said that's osmotic or stimulatory?
More osmotic.
Osmotic. Okay. So with that, what is the point where you would have someone, let's say they haven't used the bathroom for a couple of days. Is that something you're like, hey, you being backed up is actually going to cause more of a problem than it is if we use the short-term laxative? Is that generally the approach? And really what's the cutoff where how long we let that constipation or lack of bowel movement go?
Yeah. I'm going to say I never recommend Miralax. It's funny I even brought it up. Just the one that comes to my brain. But if it's been, for me, like if it's been more than 3 days, I typically am like, use something. Because the last thing you want to do is just have like disgusting old food just fermenting. That's going to lead to an overgrowth in itself. That's going to cause your body to reabsorb toxins, and you're going to feel like a gassy, bloated whale that hates life. So I say if it's been more than 3 days, try something. Start with a fiber. Start with 2 kiwis, 2 tablespoons of chia seeds a day. That typically helps most people. If that doesn't work, then try a fiber. Try the sun fiber. Do a scoop of that. Or do 4 to 5 grams of psyllium husk. If that doesn't work, then you can try something like 500 to 800 milligrams of magnesium citrate or oxide. I typically see oxide work better. If that doesn't work, then you can go into the stimulatory laxatives. My personal favorite, and they don't pay me to say this, is Cellcore Bowel Mover, because it has so many different types of agents for stimulation. But I typically say you could start with 1, move up to 3 capsules at night, and that will typically produce a bowel movement. That has never not worked for my clients.
Amazing. That's so helpful. And I'm going to definitely link those to the show notes below, just if any individuals are interested in checking those products out. Now, there's something, you know what? Okay. So in your realm, are you seeing some of these issues with digestion that I think the term, correct me if I'm wrong, is cholestasis? Are you seeing a lot of that tied to the use of GLP-1? So things like Ozempic, semaglutide, Wegovy, just because we've seen that big uptick of use, whether that be actually for its FDA approval of obesity. Are you seeing a strong correlation with that stasis in the gut?
That's a good question. I actually am more seeing like delayed gastric emptying and more gastroparesis types of symptoms and SIBO than that happen. And you know what? It's like a hit or miss based on people, but I truly believe like if you're taking something like that, you can prevent that from happening by the way that you're eating and by using prokinetics.
Okay, I love that. Yeah, no, I mean with Ozempic in the bodybuilding space, that's been something that a lot of individuals, whether competitors or not, have kind of come my way and been like, "Hey, I want to put this in." Again, kind of stubbornly, I'm going to be
Yeah.
putting it in, or I already have it in, and I don't want to come off it. Okay, so if that's the case, just educating yourself on, okay, what are those risk factors? Do you have a strong, or I guess strict, not strict contraindication that um, you should be aware of? But I do feel like when you're unnecessarily modulating peristalsis, when you are changing the speed in which your body is going to be breaking down food and eliminating it, that in itself, I mean, like that can lead to exactly what you've described at several points in this episode, that overgrowth of bacteria and potentially causing a problem that isn't there, or that wasn't there prior to.
Yeah, 100%.
Amazing, amazing. You had brought up the charcoal as you had mentioned that just when we were talking about the laxatives. Tell me about that. Tell listeners about that, because like I've only ever heard of individuals using it like post cheat meal, post large just overfeeding period. Is that something? How do we feel about that?
How
Tell
do
us
we
how we
use it?
feel.
Yeah. So honestly, I think charcoal has a lot of amazing qualities to it. But the reason people basically use it is it helps to bind gas to prevent bloating. Now, that should never be just like the thing that you want to do, because it also binds to your foods and your nutrients and your minerals, and it can dehydrate you. So I try and to like not recommend that. There are other things that you could do when it comes down to gas and bloating, whether that's, adding in digestive enzymes or an anti-bloating supplement, something like that. Ginger's great, fennel's great, but yeah, activated charcoal should be used because you're doing some shape or form of detoxification work with a professional for mold or heavy metals, or if you ate something maybe that is poisonous to your body and you're trying to bind it and get rid of it. That's essentially what charcoal does. It helps to bind things in your gut. So that's why you don't want to use it. Like, I think that's another reason why people maybe use it in cheat meals, to help like bind and not extract those nutrients. But it's really highly likely that's even going to do anything.
Yeah, that just
It
seems a
just doesn't
little
make sense to me.
no. And I mean, like, even the idea around like glucose disposal agents, not that there might be someone who wouldn't benefit from those, but just a matter of the use that I tend to see is very, very aimless. Is just a matter of, okay, I know that I'm going to overeat, so I know I'm going to include this, and it's going to prevent this fat gain. It's like, I don't think that is the proper use for it. I don't think that it just undoes the calories, but
Yeah.
that's typically what I see when individuals who have prior use with charcoal as like I don't know, a combative method against fat gain. I'm like, it just seems a little reckless in the long term. Maybe just the modification of the amount of food or the types of food is a better route.
I mean, there's things you can do to like help support and reduce the insulin surge, whether you're doing apple cider vinegar or berberine or bitter melon or cinnamon, whatever it is. But like, what's the benefit? 2%? Probably.
Yeah, it's not going to net zero what
No.
that 1,000-calorie meal is
No.
doing. Okay, so I know we're coming up on our time, but talk to me about mold exposure, because I know that's something you yourself you've dealt with. What year was that?
That was in 2019. Yeah. That was in 2019. It literally took me probably actually 3 months of living in there to completely just go downhill. Yeah. So mold's everywhere, right? Whether that's coming from outside or inside. And unfortunately, we're always exposed to molds, but there's certain individuals, whether that's because you have an HLR gene, that HLA-R gene, so you're more sensitive to it, or you have just like so many drops in your toxic or inflammatory bucket to where you're gonna have a sensitivity or detoxification issue with that. But unfortunately, mold will basically wreak havoc on your entire body, whether that's your kidneys, your liver, your reproductive organs, your brain, increasing your risk for Alzheimer's, whether that's causing direct damage to your gut. There's so many things that it can do, but unfortunately, mold completely ripped me a new one and caused so many issues for me in particular. And I don't always, because I know I don't want people to freak out and jump into mold because we're exposed to it. But unfortunately, it can be hidden. and it can be a demon to your body, and it can wreak havoc on your health. So with mold, people typically have some shape or form of either rapid weight gain or weight loss issue. They have a lot of brain fog, mental clarity issues, digestive distress, whether that's gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, reoccurring SIBO that never goes away, candida that never goes away. And there typically is a huge neurological component to that, whether that's anxiety, depression, OCD, even autism behaviors, ADHD, ADD behaviors, and it will definitely take your life away. So, I mean, I just want to give recommendations to reduce that exposure because I never want anybody to have to go through that like I did. Please make sure that you have a HEPA air filter to like filter out the air. That's going to be the smallest tiny particles. Make sure that you're using your fans, the vents, every single time you are, taking a shower for 15 minutes, use a dehumidifier, change your HVAC system every single month. Not the HVAC system, the filter on that, and just really be very careful when it comes down to like signs of mold in your home. Physique competitors, I do work with some that have had mold exposure. So older homes or homes that have been built up quickly. I know people go, oh, I live in a new home, it's fine. But those are the ones that are typically the worst. So doing that, looking for signs and symptoms, and just paying attention to your history too, because mold can be in your body from a past exposure, and it will not always cause an issue right then and there. But as you develop more issues and you're exposed to more over time, for example, maybe there's a lady, this actually is literally the exact example of what would happen. Lovely lady. I love her, still work with her, bodybuilder. Great. Had mold exposure in the past. We found that out recently. And she never had issues, but over time she started developing gas, bloating, estrogen dominance. Ultimately, we did her labs one time because she had told me she had taken Ostarine. So I was like, which is a SARM, right? So I was like, okay, we got to do complete blood work because you're not feeling good. Let's dive deeper. Let's do a GI. Let's see what's going on. Ultimately, that led us to the autoimmune issue, Hashimoto's, which then led us to, okay, there's something more. Then we did a mold test. Turns out there's mold in her body that's been there for 15 years. Would we have found that without, all the other things that had happened in her past? Probably not. So I love Vibrant America. They use a great mycotoxin screening, but there's also like real-time labs or Mosaic diagnosis. It used to be a different name, but Mosaic, that's great for testing to see if it's in your body, that's urine collection. Now there can be an issue because it's so nuanced. There can be an issue with not being able to detoxify it. So if your detox pathways, your lymphatic system are so backed up and there's so much that you cannot clear out, sometimes you don't see everything. But that's my best friend if you're looking to see if it's in your body. There are other things like the VCS test. It's basically an eye test that can indicate there might be an exposure. There's Dr. Shoemaker's blood work that says there might be an exposure. But like I find checking to see if it's in your body is key. And then there's testing to see if it's in your environment, in your home. The Mycometrics ERMI is my favorite. It will tell you if there's an exposure. So yeah, there's testings that will tell you. The key thing is with the urine test, you don't know when was that exposure? Where is it? Because mold will actually hide in your fat tissue. It's hydrophobic, hydrophilic, so it will slip and slide in between the fat tissue and the different tissues in your body. And so you never know when was that exposure, but you do know it's in your body and you got to work on it. Yeah, of course. It's been such a pleasure and an honor and a joy to get to speak with you today. It's been a while. So thank you guys so much for listening. You can go to my website. It's upliftfitnutrition.com. My Instagram is at Faith and Fit because I'm Team Jesus. And then you also have, my podcast is Root Cause Radio, where I give a lot of good podcast episodes in regards to hormones, thyroid, gut health, you name it. So you guys can check that out if you want to work with me. Just holla at me. A lot of people think that I only do kind of like just coaching, but I also do consultations. So if you want my help with that, definitely come at me. If you have questions in regards to, should I do testing? Should I do this first? Please message me too. Don't waste your money. I'm more than happy to, push you to where you should invest your money.